The great council hall was alive with noise, the kind that filled the air like a storm, hundreds of alien delegates shouting over one another, arguing about borders, fleets, and trade lines, the kind of endless noise that had echoed through this chamber for centuries. The domed ceiling glimmered with the blue light of distant star maps, each representing empires, territories, and old scars. It was chaos wrapped in protocol, and that chaos was familiar to them all, a part of the galaxy's rhythm. But all it took was one trembling envoy, his voice shaking like the hull of a dying ship, to end it all. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout, he just whispered a single word, Earth. The sound was small, but it struck the room like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence, the chamber seemed to shrink. The glowing maps dimmed as if the word itself pulled the light away. Generals who moments ago argued with fire in their voices froze. Ambassadors who had seen wars bigger than planets stared at each other with wide eyes. The name wasn't supposed to be spoken. Not here. Not ever. For generations, it had been buried under silence and fear. It wasn't just a word, it was a warning that still echoed in their blood. The envoy who spoke it looked like he already regretted it. His hands shook as if the sound of his own voice had cursed him. On the far side of the chamber, an admiral slowly pushed back his chair, the metal scraping against the stone floor like thunder. His jaw clenched tight, not out of anger but something worse, recognition. Everyone in that room knew what the word meant, even those who had never seen the Terran sector, even those born centuries after the war. Earth was supposed to be gone. Wiped out. Erased from the stars. But if someone had spoken their name, it meant something had changed. The head of the council, a tall and scaled figure with silver markings on her neck, slowly leaned forward. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a blade. Repeat that. Her tone wasn't a request. It was a test. The envoy swallowed hard. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. His voice cracked as he whispered again, this time slower, heavier, like each letter weighed 1,000 tons, Earth. The silence that followed didn't feel like stillness. It felt alive. It felt like the entire galaxy held its breath. Somewhere deep in the hall, someone's pen fell and echoed like a gunshot. A single word had done what no threat, no weapon, no armada could do. It made the galaxy afraid again. A young diplomat from a frontier world, too young to know why this mattered, whispered to the delegate beside him, "It's just a planet." His voice was quickly silenced by a sharp glare, the kind of look that carried centuries of terror. Because Earth wasn't just a planet. Earth was a legend buried under layers of ash and blood. It was the place that had turned fleets to dust, where superpowers had burned out their own names, where a species had fought wars so brutal the galaxy itself turned its eyes away. On the west side of the hall, an older admiral slowly stood up. His chest bore medals from wars no one dared talk about anymore. His voice was low, but it reached every corner of the chamber. "If that name is being spoken again," he said, "then something is coming." His words weren't a threat. They were a prophecy. Holographic star maps flickered to life, displaying the Terran exclusion zone, a dark patch of space at the edge of the spiral arm, where no one went, where scanners never returned signals, where expeditions vanished without trace. It had been silent for centuries. No colonies. No fleets. No lights. Just black. The name of Earth had become something whispered only in war stories and bedtime warnings. Never go where the Terrans were. Never wake the silence. But now the silence felt different. Heavy. Watching, the council head turned toward the envoy who had dared to speak the word. Her voice was sharper now. Why was that name spoken? He stammered, fumbling with the data pad in his shaking hands, before projecting a faint signal over the center of the chamber. A red light blinked slowly on the star map, right on the edge of the Terran exclusion zone. A distress beacon. No, not distress. A pulse. One that repeated every 13 seconds, cold and precise. The language was simple. A signal every species in that room recognized, even if they wished they didn't. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a plea. It was a message written in old Terran code. "We are still here." A gasp ran through the chamber, not loud but sharp, like the sound of a blade unsheathing. Delegates looked at each other with pale faces, claws tightening, fins twitching, feathers rising, instincts screaming. The young diplomat who had dismissed Earth earlier now sat frozen, realizing too late why the others were afraid. The last time that signal had been heard, an entire armada had gone into the black. Not one ship had returned. Not a single transmission. Only silence followed. The galaxy called it the Vanishing War. Humanity didn't need an empire. Humanity didn't need borders. They needed silence. And silence was their greatest weapon. Whispers started spreading across the room again, fast and sharp like knives. It can't be real. They were destroyed. The zone was sealed. No one survives that long. It's a trick. It's them. It didn't matter what they said. It didn't matter if they believed it or not. Every single being in that hall could feel the cold weight of truth pressing down on their chest. One counselor slammed their fist against the table, their voice shaking. If they are still there, then the treaties mean nothing. Every border we built, every fleet we raised, it was to keep the idea of them buried. An old captain, his voice hoarse and cracked from age, whispered almost too softly to hear, "You can bury their name, but you can't bury Earth." The chamber emptied long after the word had been spoken, but the silence left behind didn't fade. It spread like a quiet storm through corridors built to hold secrets. The name Earth now crawled through the galaxy's veins, carried in whispers, hidden in encrypted transmissions, the kind that traveled faster than fleets, faster than logic, because fear doesn't need permission to move. Outside the Grand Hall, ambassadors who had kept their composure inside were now pale and trembling, speaking in fast, hushed tones, their guards looking over their shoulders like the sound of that one word could summon something in the dark. No one dared say it again, not out loud, but it sat heavy in the air, like smoke after a fire, clinging to every wall and every mind that had heard it on the orbital level above the council world. Encrypted channels flared to life like sparks in dry wood. Governments called emergency sessions in the middle of the night. Old military files were pulled from vaults sealed centuries ago. Even empires that had sworn never to work together were sending coded inquiries to each other. Because this wasn't just about a name. This was about something that should have remained buried. The Terran exclusion zone, once treated like a dark corner of the map no one dared look at, was now being scanned again by every major faction. Fleets shifting quietly, long-range probes being deployed. But the terror felt fresh. The last lines of those reports weren't tactical instructions. They were warnings written by survivors who were never meant to speak again. Do not seek them. Do not speak their name. If you do, they will know. Back in the council hall, long after everyone had left, the council head remained alone, staring at the floating red dot over the Terran exclusion zone. She had seen wars break empires. She had watched planets burn. But nothing felt like this. This wasn't a battle she could predict. This was something older, heavier, something that didn't need to move to be feared. She whispered to herself, almost soundlessly, "Why now?" But no one could answer. Within a single standard hour, hidden intelligence networks were active again. The old Terran files, the ones the galaxy tried to erase, were suddenly the most accessed archives in the spiral arm. Generals met in secret, commanders recalled fleets from borders, and whispers about the old enemy filled the highest levels of power. Every race had their version of the story. Some remembered a war, others a warning. Some told legends of black ships drifting like ghosts, appearing without sound and leaving nothing behind but silence. But the detail that never changed was this. Whenever humanity appeared, someone disappeared. A small research outpost near the border of the exclusion zone caught the first faint pulse of the signal. It was weak, almost like a heartbeat hidden under layers of cosmic noise. The scientists tried to brush it off as static at first, but then it repeated, every 13 seconds, the same cold, perfect rhythm. One scientist leaned over the console and whispered, "This isn't just a signal, it's a listening device." Another asked what she meant, and her hands shook as she turned to him. "It means they're not just talking," she whispered, "they're listening to us." Across the galaxy, military chatter grew frantic but quiet. Orders were sent in whispers, fleets began to move without public announcement, and stations near the exclusion line were told to stand down their broadcasts. No one wanted to be the one to draw attention. No one wanted to be the reason the silence ended. Empires that had fought each other for centuries suddenly shared one unspoken thought. Whatever you do, don't provoke Earth. The younger diplomats tried to understand why everyone was acting like the stars themselves were about to fall. They had grown up in a time where Earth was just a myth, a dark corner on an old star map, a bedtime story about what happens to arrogant empires. But the elders remembered. Their grandparents remembered. They remembered fleets vanishing without distress calls, worlds surrendering without resistance, the cold precision with which the Terrans moved. They didn't fight wars the way others did. They ended them in an underground bunker beneath the Council world. The security directorate met in shadows. A single screen glowed on the wall, playing the decoded Terran pulse on repeat, each thump hitting like a heartbeat. One general finally said what everyone was too afraid to speak aloud. They know their name was spoken. No one responded. They didn't need to. The galaxy had lived long enough under the illusion of safety. But this was different. Silence spread like gravity, pulling everything toward it. Every fleet commander knew what this meant. Every diplomat knew what it implied. The moment the name Earth was spoken, the galaxy had stopped being in control. It wasn't about ships or weapons or politics. It was about a force that had been silent for too long. A force that didn't need to roar to be feared. Out in the void, just beyond the black edges of the exclusion zone, something shifted. It wasn't seen. It wasn't scanned. But old Terran beacons blinked once, like eyes opening after a long sleep. The council head finally stood, her towering figure casting long shadows across the chamber. "Seal this session," she ordered. "No transmissions. No records. This does not leave this room." But even she knew it was already too late. Fear like this spreads faster than war. As the chamber doors closed, the delegates sat in their silence, the blinking red dot still hovering in the air above them. Steady, patient, ancient. It was as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Because everyone in that room understood one thing, even if they didn't say it out loud. Humanity didn't have to arrive to make the galaxy tremble. All they had to do was let their name be spoken. And the galaxy fell silent, deep beneath the capital of the Galactic Council, where sunlight never reached and the walls were older than most star empires. The sealed archives trembled with new life. Heavy doors that had not been opened in centuries groaned as security codes long forgotten were forced back online. The air down here was stale and cold, the kind of cold that remembered things the galaxy wanted to forget. And in the center of the chamber stood a circular console marked with one warning in a dozen languages burned into metal plates. "Do not access. Terran files classified." Generals, intelligence officers, and senior council members surrounded it, their faces pale, their voices low, because everyone in that room knew what was buried here, and they had spent their whole lives pretending it no longer existed. The oldest archivist, a thin creature with translucent skin, placed her trembling hand on the console. "Are you sure?" she whispered, but the council head only gave a single nod. There was no choice anymore. The system hummed awake with a low, steady sound, like an old machine that had been waiting for this exact moment. Holographic symbols appeared in the air, codes no one had spoken aloud in generations. The archivist entered the emergency override. The warning flashed red, once, twice, and then the Terran files opened like a wound being torn wide again. The first recording flickered into view. Grainy, dark, heavy static in the background. A battlefield burned on the display, ships with Terran markings moving through a fleet that had once belonged to the Coalition of Seven. The Terrans weren't broadcasting threats or making demands. They weren't even talking. They moved like shadows through fire, efficient, brutal, silent. One fleet commander whispered, "This can't be real." But the old admiral standing next to him didn't look away. "It's real," he said, his voice a cracked whisper. "I watched this with my own eyes when I was young. I saw entire systems fall without a single Terran transmission. When Earth moves, the stars hold their breath." The files scrolled further, and the room filled with a cold light as text appeared across the holographic wall. It was humanity's final broadcast to the galaxy, the one the archives had buried for centuries, the one no one dared to speak of. The voice that came through wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was calm, steady, chilling. "Do not seek us. Do not speak our name. Do not test our silence. If you do, you will find more than war. The voice faded. The room stayed silent for a long time. Someone in the corner whispered, "We thought they were bluffing." An older ambassador snapped back without looking away from the glowing words, then explained the fleets that never returned. No one responded, because everyone in that room knew what happened. Whole coalitions had tried to claim Terran space after Earth's disappearance. None of them had ever come back. No wreckage, no distress calls, just vanished. More recordings played, not propaganda, not myths, raw military logs, intercepted transmissions, black box audio from ships that entered Terran space and never came out. One recording showed a fleet of 200 ships entering the exclusion zone. The commander's voice was confident, almost amused. The final seconds of the recording were nothing but silence, followed by a single Terran phrase whispered through the static, "We warned you." As the files played, younger officers shifted uncomfortably, their faces drained of color. Many of them had grown up hearing that Earth was a myth, an old story told to scare cadets into respecting protocols. They were realizing now that the myth was the truth, and the history they'd been taught was a lie. The galaxy hadn't defeated Earth. It had just survived their silence. The council head raised her hand, and the room went still. "These files were sealed for a reason," she said quietly. "Humanity was not erased. They walked away, and we built everything on the hope they'd never look back." She pointed at the blinking red dot still pulsing on the map. "And now they have." An intelligence officer pulled up the last set of records, labeled the Exile Accord. The document was older than any living being in the room. It wasn't a treaty. It was a surrender, written not in Terran language, but in the language of their enemies. It detailed the last time a coalition confronted Earth. It described how the galaxy bent, how entire sectors gave up without a single shot fired because they knew what would happen if they didn't. The accord ended with one line written by human hands, "You may forget us. We won't forget you." For a long moment, the only sound in the archive room was the low hum of the machines. The council head closed her eyes, whispering under her breath, "We thought we had time." But the galaxy had never had time. Humanity had given them borrowed years, and now those years were ending outside the archive. Encrypted channels were already lighting up. Empires were mobilizing fleets in secret, even as their leaders pretended nothing was wrong. Patrol stations near the Terran exclusion zone were quietly reinforcing their defenses, their soldiers whispering in the dark about the old stories, about the black ships that came without warnings, about fleets that died without a sound. No one said the name Earth. Not out loud, but it was in their heads like a shadow pressed against glass. The last recording the archivist played was different from the rest. It wasn't a war log. It was a civilian transmission. It showed the Earth itself, blue oceans, green continents, and a voiceover that simply said, "We are human. We do not forget. And when the stars forget us, we return." The recording ended with the Terran crest flickering on the wall. The officers and ambassadors in that room stared at each other, realizing something they had buried deep. The galaxy's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating humanity. It was thinking humanity would stay gone forever. The council head turned slowly toward the door, her expression carved from stone. "Prepare the fleets," she whispered, "and pray it's enough." In that moment, across the galaxy, fear wasn't a rumor anymore. It was history coming back. And this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. The Terran exclusion zone hung in the darkness of space like a scar, vast and black, a region the galaxy had carefully erased from maps, and for centuries no one had dared to approach it. But now, after the whisper of Earth's name, after the pulse signal that echoed like a heartbeat through the void, the galaxy's borders began to tremble in ways no one wanted to admit. It started at a small patrol station, Station Luma 17, on the edge of neutral territory. A group of weary operators manned their posts, expecting another night of silence. But silence did not come. One of the operators leaned forward, his eyes wide as a red mark appeared on his scanner. Not moving, not transmitting, just there. His hand shook as he adjusted the sensors. "Unidentified contact, Sector 9, he whispered, But the words felt too small for what he saw. The other operators gathered around his station. There was no engine signature, no life signs, no radiation spikes. It was like the void itself had taken shape. Then, slowly, the shape revealed its outline. A massive black vessel with sharp, clean edges, unlike anything the current galaxy fleets could build. It hung in space like it had always been there. When they tried to hail it, the signal bounced back, clean and flat, like their voices had hit a wall. When they tried to scan deeper, their systems went dark. One by one, consoles flickered out, lights dimmed, and the sound of the station's ventilation became the only noise in the room. "It's not jamming us," one of them whispered. "It's just turning everything off." At that same moment, on the other side of the galaxy, an encrypted alert hit the Council's military command. No explosion. No battle. Just the record of a silent ship that came and went like a shadow. The fleet commander reading the report didn't speak for several seconds, because he recognized the description. Every old war file said the same thing. When Terran ships appear, there is no warning. There is no conversation. There is only silence. He ordered 3 fleets to prepare for immediate deployment to the sector. His voice steady but his hands clenched behind his back. The officers under him didn't even question it. They had all heard the stories since childhood at a T-Luma 17. The massive black ship remained motionless for exactly 3 minutes. Then, without light, without sound, without a ripple in the void, it vanished. Not jumped. Not cloaked. Vanished. The power came back online seconds later. The scans showed nothing but empty space. No signal. No trace. No proof it had ever been there except for the terrified faces of the crew and the silent red mark on the logs. "It's the same signature," whispered the station chief. "Terran-class pattern. Ancient code." The council called an emergency session within the hour. This time, there was no shouting, no debate. The delegates entered the chamber already pale, their steps quiet, their voices dead. A single recording of the black vessel hovered above the table, and everyone in that room knew exactly what it meant. The last time Terran ships were seen, empires fell like dominoes. One ambassador muttered, "It could be a trick." Another hissed back, "And what if it's not?" The silence that followed that question was heavier than the walls around them. Meanwhile, sightings spread like wildfire. Patrol routes on the edges of several star sectors picked up flickers, brief, ghostly readings of massive vessels moving with no warp trails, no heat signatures, no visible engines. Entire communication networks went offline for minutes at a time. When they came back, nothing remained but blank screens and the same repeating pulse. One beat every 13 seconds. Every ship that tried to intercept them disappeared. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Gone. No distress calls. No debris. Just erased. Admiral Crash stood on the bridge of the Dominion flagship Vortex, staring at the empty star map with a sinking feeling he hadn't felt in decades. "They are testing us," he muttered, his voice low. His second-in-command stared at him. "How can you be sure?" Crash didn't take his eyes off the map. Because that's what they always do before the Real storm comes. He'd studied the old Terran war files in secret. Everyone in the higher ranks did. Not because it was mandatory, but because deep down, they all knew one day this moment would return in a hidden data room inside the council capital. Intelligence chiefs compared new sensor readings with historical data. The match was perfect. Every ship sighting aligned with old Terran vessel designs. It wasn't just a single ship. It was a pattern. A formation. The scouts weren't random. They were deliberate. "They're mapping us," one officer whispered, tracing the red dots. "They're finding the cracks." The council heads stared at the projection in silence, feeling the same cold weight that had filled the chamber when the envoy had spoken Earth's name. Only this time, the fear had a shape. By dawn cycle, half the galaxy knew. Official broadcasts said nothing, but whispers spread like blood in water. Cargo captains diverted routes. Civilian traffic near the exclusion zone disappeared overnight. Frontier colonies shut off their beacon signals, praying to stay unnoticed. Soldiers on border stations began writing messages to families they hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone felt it. like a storm moving just beyond the horizon. And out in the void, just beyond the edge of known space, more shadows began to stir. Terran warships, sleek and black, moved in silence. They didn't flash warnings. They didn't announce their presence. They had waited for centuries, and now they were moving like predators that had been patient for far too long. Humanity didn't need to roar. They just needed to remind the galaxy that they still existed. And with every silent ship, with every flicker on the scanners, the galaxy trembled a little more. The whispers of Terran sightings turned into something heavier, something alive, a weight that settled over every star system like a storm you couldn't see but could feel crawling under your skin. Every government across the spiral arm tried to keep their panic quiet. But fear has no master, and soon entire fleets were moving without public announcements. Trade routes were closing overnight, and civilian broadcasts were filled with short, sharp bursts of rumors about black ships in the dark, fleets that didn't make a sound and didn't leave anything behind. The galaxy had spent centuries convincing itself that Earth was gone, but now that illusion cracked like glass under pressure. In the Dominion High Command, Admiral Kraish stood before a war room filled with maps and holoprojections. His officers reported one after another, their voices tight, their hands shaking slightly as they pushed data across the table. For more patrol fleets had vanished in the outer sectors, their signals snuffed out like candles in a storm. Not a single distress call. Not a single survivor. Only silence. "This is coordinated," said his second-in-command, her voice lower than usual. "It's too clean to be random." Kraish didn't answer right away. He stared at the shifting red lines on the holomap, each one representing a missing fleet. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't an invasion. This was positioning. Humanity wasn't charging in like conquerors. They were surrounding everything quietly. At the same time, the council chamber filled again, but this time no one shouted. No one argued over territory or trade. They just sat, shoulders stiff, eyes locked on the single map floating in the center of the room. It showed the exclusion zone, a black scar at the edge of the galaxy, and around it, red dots, Terran vessels. They weren't scattered. They were forming arcs, lines, rings. One council member whispered, "It's like they've been waiting." Another corrected him in a flat voice, "No, it's like they've already planned everything." Reports flooded in from dozens of systems. Merchant convoys disappeared without trace. Military outposts went dark. Frontier worlds reported seeing dark stars in orbit. Ships so massive they blocked starlight but made no sound, no threat, no demand. Just the presence of something that didn't need to explain itself. The younger delegates begged to send a united fleet to show strength. The older ones shook their heads because they remembered. Every time the galaxy tried to stand against Earth, it ended the same way that I in the shadow of the council spire. Intelligence agents worked around the clock, pulling old Terran war files out of archives, decrypting records their own ancestors had tried to bury. And what they found made even the most seasoned officers pale. These weren't ordinary warships appearing. These were Leviathan-class dreadnoughts, Terran constructs so large entire fleets had been built just to hold them back, and failed. The records weren't battle reports. They were surrender logs far away. In the silent blackness of the exclusion zone itself, something vast began to move. Not just single ships this time. Entire fleets. They moved with the precision of predators that had stalked their prey for generations. No light. No sound. Their hulls absorbed every signal like they were made from the night itself. They didn't need banners or symbols. The moment a ship saw them, it already knew Admiral Kraish stood alone on the bridge of the vortex, his fleet one of the last major task forces still standing near the exclusion line. The galaxy was mobilizing, but none of it felt like enough. His communications officer reported, "All outer defense fleets have gone silent." His jaw clenched. He had expected it. He had studied the old battles. The first wave of Terran action was always the same. Erase the eyes, silence the borders, make the enemy realize they were already surrounded before they could even draw their blades in the lower sectors. Panic began to crack through the surface. Civilian ships flooded neutral ports, refusing to launch into the black. Markets crashed as shipping networks collapsed. The word Earth spread like fire, not as a whisper anymore, but as a curse people muttered under their breath. It wasn't a question of where the Terrans were. It was a question of when they would decide to speak. Inside the Council's war room, the delegates stared at the map in silence as the red marks representing Terran ships grew closer to key systems. A single younger diplomat asked, trembling, "Why aren't they attacking?" No one answered. But deep down, they all knew. Humanity didn't need to attack to win. Their silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. By the time they spoke, it would already be over. Fleet Admiral Senka of the Allied Corps stood from her chair slowly, her voice low but firm. "We're not facing a threat," she said. "We're facing judgment." Her words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on every soul in the room. They had mocked the old stories. They had turned Earth into myth. And now the myth had come back, not roaring, not screaming, just existing. And that alone was enough to make empires tremble. In a small observation post on a mining world near the Terran border, a young lieutenant looked up through the glass dome into the black sky. At first he thought it was an eclipse. Then he realized it wasn't the sky going dark. It was something moving above them. A shape so massive it blocked out the stars. A single Terran Leviathan, its hull silent, its presence suffocating. It didn't fire. It didn't move closer. It just was. He fell to his knees without even knowing why. Every empire, every fleet, every station understood something in that moment. Earth didn't announce their return. Earth didn't need to. They had been waiting in the dark all along. Watching, measuring, preparing. And now, with their ships silently surrounding the galaxy like wolves circling a herd, the message was clear. The galaxy had spent centuries forgetting. But humanity had remembered everything. Panic spread through the galaxy like a cold wind no one could stop. It moved faster than fleets, faster than official broadcasts, faster than the lies the Council tried to hold together. The sighting of Terran Leviathans hanging above mining worlds, patrol stations, and trade hubs had already reached every star system. Even the farthest colonies at the edges of the spiral arm whispered the same word like a quiet prayer that held no mercy, Earth. No formal declaration of war had been made, no transmission had been received, not a single Terran voice had been heard, but every government, every admiral, every soldier knew what it meant when the black ships appeared. Because silence was never just silence with humanity. It was the sound before the storm, the breath before the strike. In the Council war chamber, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in their chairs like prisoners awaiting a verdict. The star map projected above the table had changed from weeks ago. What had once been a clear, divided galaxy of empires and borders now looked like it was shrinking. Terran red markers wrapped around the outer sectors like a tightening noose. Hundreds of dots now pulsing faintly where black ships had been sighted, not moving fast, not attacking, just closing in. The Council head stood at the center of the chamber with both hands gripping the edge of the table. Her voice sharp but shaking as she said, "They're surrounding us, and they haven't fired a single shot." An older admiral to her left whispered, "That's exactly how it started last time." Fleet reports rolled in one after another, communication blackouts near critical border systems, colonies that went dark without distress calls, fleets sent to investigate that simply never returned. The galaxy was being peeled apart one layer at a time, not through battle, but through precision. A young commander tried to sound brave as he said, "We should strike first, show them we're not afraid." But his voice trembled, and no one in the room agreed. They all remembered what happened to the last coalition that tried that centuries ago. They were erased so fast the galaxy didn't even have time to call it a war. It was a silence that stretched for generations. On the bridge of the Dominion flagship Vortex, Admiral Crash stared out at the starfield from behind the reinforced glass of the observation deck. The stars ahead looked wrong, not because they'd changed, but because something massive now sat between them. A Terran Leviathan hung in the void like a god that didn't need to speak. His officers didn't breathe too loudly. "Why aren't they doing anything?" one of them whispered. Crash's jaw tightened. "Because they already have." Back at the Council capital, every government in the spiral arm had sent envoys to one place, crowding the massive hallways of the Council spire. There were no more arguments over territory or alliances now. There was only fear. They all knew this wasn't a fight between empires anymore. It was a reckoning. Someone from the Frontier Alliance stood and shouted, "We have to talk to them." while another from the core system snapped back, "And what happens when they answer?" The silence that followed said everything. The council head stepped onto the central platform and raised her hand. Her voice didn't carry power anymore, but desperation. "We have no choice," she said. "We either reach out to them, or wait for them to decide when to crush us." No one argued this time. The memory of Terran wars lived like a shadow in their history. The diplomats who had once laughed at old war stories now sat pale and stiff in their seats. Across the galaxy, fleets held their positions at borders that no longer meant anything. Entire battle groups stared into the void at the shapes of black ships that never moved closer but never left either. They didn't broadcast demands, didn't threaten with ultimatums, didn't boast. They just waited. And every second of that silence cut deeper than 1,000 war cries. A signal was finally prepared by the Council. The most carefully crafted message in galactic history. No threats, no posturing, only one line repeated in 52 languages and binary code. "This is the Galactic Council. We seek to speak with Earth." It was sent across every channel, bounced through relay stations, pushed through the void like a desperate plea. And then the galaxy waited. Seconds turned into minutes. Minutes into hours. Then, every communication system in every star system blinked at once. Not just on council channels. Everywhere. From the core to the outer rings. From warships to private freighters. From military command to tiny colonies. All of it froze under the same signal. It wasn't loud. It wasn't long. It was a single Terran transmission that didn't come from one place, but from everywhere at once. 3 words, clean, precise, and cold as the void itself. "We remember everything." The words repeated 3 times, then the signal died. No origin trace. No coordinates. No return channel. Just silence again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This was heavier. Real. Final. On every bridge, in every council chamber, in every colony, the reaction was the same. Some whispered. Some cried. Some simply stood frozen. Because those 3 words carried the weight of an old promise. A promise the galaxy had prayed would never be kept. Admiral Crash whispered to no one in particular. "They're not warning us. They're reminding us." Around him, his officers exchanged terrified glances. In the council chamber, one delegate broke down and shouted, "What did we do?" But everyone already knew the answer. Humanity didn't forget. The galaxy did, and now, the consequences of that mistake were standing outside their borders, wrapped in black steel and silence, waiting for the moment to step forward. Humanity didn't need to roar. Their memory was enough to make the galaxy kneel. The galaxy was no longer breathing, it was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable to fall like a blade. The Terran signal still echoed in every system like a ghost that refused to leave. "We remember everything." 3 words, but they had broken the illusion of power that held this galaxy together for centuries. No empire, no fleet, no alliance had ever forced the entire galaxy to silence itself with a single sentence. But humanity had, without firing a single shot, without moving a single ship forward, they had taken the galaxy's voice away, and now, for the first time in generations, the galaxy understood what it meant to be prayed at the Grand Council chamber. No one was shouting anymore. The walls that had once echoed with arrogance, arguments, and speeches about power were now filled with shaking breaths and the sound of nothing. The council head stood frozen in front of the great star map, her hands resting on the glowing table as hundreds of red markers pulsed across the galaxy like the heartbeat of a predator surrounding its prey. Terran fleets. Leviathans. Silent warships in position around critical systems, trade hubs, communication nodes, fuel relays. Every piece of the galaxy's spine was already in their grip, and they hadn't even bothered to show their faces. This wasn't a war. This was a statement. Ambassadors sat stiff in their seats, faces drained of color, shoulders hunched, their elaborate uniforms now meaningless costumes in a play that was already over. One delegate finally whispered the question everyone was too afraid to ask, "What do they want?" The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The council head didn't answer. She couldn't. Because deep down, everyone in that room already knew the answer. This wasn't about what humanity wanted. This was about what they had decided long ago, when they walked away from the galaxy, when they left their warning carved into history: do not seek us. Do not speak our name. Do not test our silence. The galaxy had broken that rule. And now Earth had answered. Across every major world, fear had become a living thing, creeping through streets, markets, starports, even the hidden bunkers of military command centers. People looked to the skies, half expecting the stars themselves to go dark. Civilian transports were grounded. Military fleets floated in formation like ants trying to hold back a flood. Soldiers whispered Terran stories in the dark. Stories they'd laughed at months ago. No one was laughing now. Every man and woman in uniform knew what happened the last time Terran ships moved. They didn't fight for territory. They didn't negotiate for power. They erased those who stood in their way. Admiral Crash stood alone on the observation deck of the Vortex, staring into the black. In the distance, like a shape carved out of the void, a Terran Leviathan floated without sound or light. It didn't need to move closer. Its mere presence had turned his entire fleet into statues. His officers didn't speak. No one dared. "They are waiting," he said softly. His second-in-command swallowed hard. Waiting for what? Crash's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a truth everyone tried to bury. "For us to understand that they've already won." And he was right. The Terrans didn't need to fire their weapons. They had already taken the galaxy without a single drop of blood. Every power line, every communication node, every jump corridor was in range of their ships. They didn't arrive to beg. They didn't arrive to demand. They arrived like gods who had already written the ending, and the galaxy was only now realizing they were never in control. The Council sent out one last desperate transmission, this time not with pride or threats, but with shaking hands and trembling voices. "We acknowledge your return," the message said. "We seek peace. We seek terms." The words were sent across the void, through every relay, into the dark where Terran ships waited. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the stars changed. In dozens of systems, hidden Terran ships uncloaked, revealing their scale fully for the first time. They were not like the ships the galaxy built. These were black monoliths stretching for kilometers, some larger than orbital stations. Some with hulls that swallowed starlight entirely. And they were everywhere. Over neutral worlds. Over council sectors. Over systems that thought they were too far to matter. The galaxy finally saw the truth. Humanity had never left. They had been here, in the dark, growing. Every transmission channel flared at once. No image. No face. No face of a leader demanding surrender. Just a single Terran voice, steady, calm, almost surgical in its delivery. "We warned you," it said. "We remember what you did. We remember every betrayal, every treaty, every fleet you sent into the black. We built silence because you forced us to. Now, we break it." No one in the council chamber moved. Some began to cry quietly. Others stared blankly at the table, hands clenched, knowing resistance meant nothing. The galaxy wasn't being invaded. It was being reminded of its place. Across military fleets, soldiers lowered their weapons. Commanders gave no orders. What could they order against an enemy who was already everywhere? The Terran fleets didn't fire. They didn't need to. Their ships drifted forward just enough for the stars to vanish behind them, turning the night sky black. The galaxy understood. This wasn't a war they could win. It was a judgment they couldn't escape. In the silence that followed, one by one, worlds across the spiral arm powered down their defense grids. Empires that once called themselves unshakable bent their knees without a single shot being fired. For centuries, they had laughed at the myths of Earth. But myths have a way of waiting in the dark. And in that final moment, as Terran fleets surrounded everything, as the Council stared at their own insignificance reflected in black steel, humanity gave them no threats, no ultimatums. Just silence. Because silence was what the galaxy feared most. Humanity had not returned for conquest. Humanity had returned because their name had been spoken. And when Earth's name is spoken, the galaxy remembers who it truly fears.